Well, hello. You're listening to Funerals614, where we explain the fun in funerals, factual, useful, and noteworthy information. I am your host, Lori Diaz, the Funeral Chic.
And actually, the Funeral Chic is not here today. So I am not your host, the Funeral Chic. I am the stand-in, fill-in. I am Pastor Art Davis. I work with the Funeral Chic here, for the Funeral Chic. She is away in Atlanta for the house meeting for the National Funeral Directors and Morticians Association in Atlanta, Georgia. So we wish her safe travels there and back home. And I'm here today with Pastor Rickey Baker. Pastor Baker, you want to say hi, hey to the people?
Hello, everyone.
And so our last episode, we talked about operating and running funerals in the funeral service part of COVID-19. Pastor Baker and I are both preachers here in the city of Columbus, and I think we want to shed some light on what it was like for the church, and also trying to be or being a minister and dealing with COVID doing funerals as well. I think those were interesting and uncharted waters that none of us were really prepared for. Wouldn't you say, or how'd you feel coming into this thing?
COVID was a unknown era. Not sure what you could do, what you couldn't do. The church really struggled with the fact, do I close my church? Do I keep my church open? If I close my church, what happens to the people? How do I get paid? How do we keep the bills? COVID was very, very detrimental to the church world. It changed a lot about pastoring, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Now, what did your church decide? Did you guys ever close? Did you stay open? Did you?
We stayed open. I don't have a large church, so I took the initiative to take advantage of that at COVID time. We took all the precautions, but we didn't close the doors of the church. We kept them open, gave people that were forced to not be able to go to church a place to be able to come.
I got somewhere you can go.
While their church was closed. So we stayed open, and by the grace of God, we never had any COVID outbreaks. So
that is certainly the grace of God. So my church, we stayed open at first, and then it came up in one of our board meetings that everything was essentially closed, and people felt unsafe. So we decided to close. I quickly learned how to record at home, how to stream. I think the church at the time maybe had 20 people on our Facebook. We had to try to get that grown quickly. So when we open, we really are having a problem with a lot of people coming back.
Right.
I probably need to come down to your church, see if you got any of my members down there. Tell them they can come on home now. But no, so I think that in hindsight, those that were able or decided to stay open, I think they are not dealing with as deep a decline. Right. Some have even seen an increase. Most are at least staying the same. Right. Whereas, we've been fortunate enough that, through having funerals there and the givers that we have, we've been okay, but it's certainly not the same. Is there anything that came for the church that you think that was beneficial from COVID? Any changes? Any were you all already streaming? Anything like that you think?
From COVID, it taught us how, I believe the word that Lori likes to use is pivot.
Yes.
It taught us how to pivot and be changing with the times. Prior to COVID coming out, we had not been so social. We didn't have a social media presence.
Okay.
We didn't really, I don't want to say it was becoming more of a fad, but we hadn't really jumped into it. So it kind of forced us to become more 21st century.
Absolutely.
Get used to being able to stream your services, be able to record and send it to people who aren't able to actually make it to the building. So it it was very interesting to learn that audience.
It was uncharted waters,
Right.
man. You know, it's our first time going to electronic giving.
Right.
We had never had Cash App, never had Givelify, Zelle, any of that. It was no bring cash. That's it. Stop by the bank,
Right.
write a check. You know, so it has just those are things that I am thankful for.
Right.
It's things that as preachers we can try to introduce, and you know, some people are like, "What? Do what?" No, I'm not doing that. So I think that was beneficial, you know, from COVID. One thing is, I think it put the church into an interesting dynamic when it comes to funerals. One that is not thought of a lot. More people were trying to go to churches because they're a little larger than most funeral homes. Explain kind of if you noticed or saw any of those type dynamics or things going on. How do you think that's going?
The funeral business for the church seemed to be very touchy. To be a member of a church for 50 years and you happen to contract COVID and pass, and your pastor says you can't have your funeral at the church, or if you do, you only can bring 10 people in here. That was a very touchy situation. I'm grateful I didn't have to be a pastor that had to have that kind of conversation, because that was very 50 years of ties is a long time.
It's a long time.
You to tell me I can't have something here at the church. And how does that affect the future of my family who are members of this church? Will they come back? Will they still be faithful? Because now they're probably going to be upset that my grandma couldn't have her funeral here, and this is all we've known. So it's very touchy. Working for the funeral home as well, I've seen a lot of people be forced to have their services in places they didn't necessarily want to have them in.
Absolutely.
And then for their pastor not to even want to come and preach to
Listen,
the
I was wondering if we were going to get there. We ran into quite a few pastors who would not come preach funerals, you know, who, if they did, they were in the back door, out the back door. Hey, can you handle the gravesite? I'm not going to be able to go out there. There's too many people close.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it was interesting. And the black pastor at one point used to kind of guide the family throughout the entire funeral process.
Right.
I personally got into funerals from my uncle, Reverend Frank Latham.
Right.
When someone either in the family or at the church died, first call was Reverend Latham. He had a particular funeral home before we were open that he sent everyone to.
Right.
He called that director, hey, so-and-so passed. They need to meet with you. When do you want me to have them there? Mm-hmm. He called the family, hey, we're going over to such and such funeral home on this day at this time. And they kind of spearheaded that process, it seemed like. I realized today that it seems like a lot of pastors are very hands-off, very don't know, very what do you think the pastor's role should be, or the church's role should be ideally in the dying or funeral process at all, if you have an opinion?
My opinion with that is I strongly believe the pastor should be very much so involved, especially because it is a very emotional time for the family. Mm-hmm. As the leader, as their advisor, as their spiritual covering, I feel it's your responsibility to kind of help them avoid pitfalls or avoid disagreements that necessarily don't have to happen if you are the pastor that's going to be involved in the process. If you come to the family and say, hey, this is how we have services, this is what we do, it takes the pressure off that one person who has a sister who necessarily doesn't go to church but wants to do X, Y, and Z. Your response can be, well, my pastor says we do it this way, and that's just it.
that's it. That's all.
But it makes it's different. I think it's just the times that we live in, because like you said, when I was in training to be a minister, the first thing we had to do was to learn the process of funerals. My grandfather and father took me through the process of, what do you do when you get that first call? You should reach out to that family. Mm-hmm. you should be the first voice that those people hear, and not someone else's. Let them know you're there, you're praying for them, give them that support that they need. Nowadays, like you said, the pastor's probably the last one to call.
Yeah, we have families who come and make arrangements, and they haven't heard from the pastor. They don't know what his schedule is like. He's not there.
Right. We sit in those meetings, and you have an officiant and a eulogist. We haven't got that far yet. Are you a member of a church? Yeah. Have you called the pastor? Well, we haven't got a hold of him. Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think COVID just pushed that dynamic even more.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of people were kind of scared or nervous. They didn't feel comfortable doing it or saying, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, or even they just didn't know. Because I had a member who was in the hospital. I couldn't go see her.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure. I didn't know what I was actually able to do because of COVID. So it kind of.
So how did you navigate that? If she was in the hospital and you couldn't go in, I know we're used to being like, hey, I'm a pastor,
right?
And kind of nobody can get in,
right?
You can get in. You're that person that the family's like, okay, we need you to go see what's going on. Did you do calls, video, anything like that?
I had the privilege of. I just had one person that I really had to deal with the COVID situation, and she actually passed. She wasn't a member of my church, but she was a part of a fellowship that I was a part of, and she had went in for something small, contracted COVID. Things seemed to turn for the worse. The nurse that was actually working in the ward or whatever they call it nowadays, FaceTimed me to be able to see the person so that I can let her know I was praying for her.
Wow.
It was for me, myself, it was very emotional because I'm like, I feel like I can't do anything because of COVID. So
yeah. When you're hands on and you can't be, I tell people all the time, ministry is one of those things you have a heart for or you don't.
Right.
And if you have a heart for it and you're restricted or it just bothers you down in your spirit, like I'm not doing what I'm called to do.
Right.
Which can be hard. Now, I know a while back you had to do a seminar about how ministers operate funerals.
Right.
You have any short tips, any pet peeves, anything? Because we see a lot from other ministers, and I think sometimes we can be critical because we are ministers and we know how we would do it, but some things are just right and some things are wrong.
I remember at the seminar that I gave, it was one thing that it's a pet peeve of mine, is the minister needs to have control of the service. Mm-hmm. If you don't control the service, there's no control. Mm-hmm. The funeral director tries to, but because we're in your house, we also try to yield that respect to you. So with us trying to yield that respect to you, if you don't control it, it becomes very chaotic, especially if we have a young person service.
Right. And I think so many times the preacher is kind of nervous, and we don't really emphasize or remember the fact this is still a service.
Right.
Okay, we understand it's a funeral. Mm-hmm. We understand that it's in celebration of this person's life, but we're still in a service. We open with prayer. We open with scripture. There's going to be some preaching and some invitation to Jesus. It still is very much so, a church service, right? Especially if you're at a church. It is very much a church service, and same way you expect order on Sunday morning, we expect and hope that you'll have that order, at the funeral.
Right. The funerals for a church. What I have implemented in my church is that I have someone in position that is a funeral coordinator that's going to assist in ensuring that they work with that particular funeral home to ensure all of our expectations are met, so that there is no lack of communication or breakdown. Because sometimes with it being an emotional time, families tend to forget to communicate things to the church, or vice versa. If the families talk to the church and they say, well, we don't do X, Y, Z. What the family does not tell the funeral home. We show up and we're thinking X, Y, Z is happening, and then it just doesn't work well. So I've come to the conclusion that even in funerals, as well as we plan out everything else, a funeral needs that same attention.
Yeah, I think that's important to have that person. I remember I thought it was so crazy that we were on a service and someone was going to do a dance and found out that song was unacceptable to that particular church, and I thought it was fine, but they have their rules, and that's perfectly understandable. But I think that's important for the church to. And I don't think we do, so I'm going to talk and implement that to have someone that is that liaison of sorts between the church and the family, or the church and the funeral home, however that needs to look, so that everything runs smoothly and is on the same page. I think that's very wise to have.
And I also would say, as a pastor in the city, even though I work for Affinity Memorial Chapel, and of course that's always going to be my number one choice, it's imperative for the pastors, I think, to get to know the funeral directors that are in the city, that are in your city, so that it's not just I don't want to say a favoritism thing, but it will be what you feel would accommodate your members the best. You can. It's hard for me to say this, but sometimes, because I feel like Affinity is the best, because of course I work there, but I find myself going to different services, and I find that sometimes the family is not that well appreciative of what they've received from the service that they've received. But if the pastor had been more involved in knowing the director,
right, you almost want to be like, why did you send them there anyway?
Right.
No shade, but right. Yeah.
It needs to be more so of a build a relationship with the director, as opposed to just doing it out of, if I do this for you, you're gonna do this for me.
Right, absolutely. Because I think at the end of the day, our members trust us,
right?
And so I don't want to recommend somebody go somewhere I don't know how they're going to be treated.
Right.
I don't know the spirit and heart of this person, and or how that person personally feels about me. I want to be able to say, hey, you know what? Call Lori. She's going to treat you well.
Right.
Let her know Pastor Art, told you to call, and it's going to be a smooth process. I know they're going to be loved on, taken care of,
right.
That sort of thing. So I think that's very important, is to know who those directors are, who, staff members, what have you. At the end of the day, the funeral home and funeral directors are people like everyone else.
Right.
We're people. We want to come to Family and Friends Day, and we want to hang out and get some barbecue. It's better to know us and not need us than to need us and not know us.
Right.
I don't know where I heard that, but I know I heard that in regards to funeral workers.
And I once heard Miss Diaz say that we would appreciate it more if you would contact us for events other than things you need us to sponsor financially.
Well,
we like to come to community. We Affinity, we sometimes go and we do a lot of community service work, but don't just contact us when you need sponsors for your souvenir journal or pastor's 50th anniversary and you need a $300 sponsor.
See, only a pastor can tell a pastor. Only a pastor can tell a pastor, because we keep our donation letters ready.
Right.
Print. I can send you an email right now. I got a donation letter for you.
Right.
But really, there are so many other things.
Right.
We can, just being in the service, just being a part of the family. It goes a long way. We all worship somewhere or lead worship somewhere. And so, we want to be active members of the community at large, which some may not be used to, but that is very much how we are. I've seen all of the staff at services, regular church services, or just events, just having fun, which is good. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. Anything else you want to add about church, funerals, COVID?
I will say, COVID did shift, excuse me, the dynamics of the funeral business for a short season. Again, working for Affinity, I did realize and see some of the things that we had to do to adjust to. I wouldn't say to, that we were mandated to, because they really didn't give us a lot of mandates. The governor, he was kind of lenient with the funerals and weddings, I think are the two that he kind of gave leniency to, but we still had to adjust to ensure the safety of our staff and the safety of those that were attending the service. And I noticed that the value of respect that people have for their own personal lives is very minimal.
Yeah.
For us to have to tell you, keep your mask on. We're only doing this because we're trying to service the family, but to keep us and them safe, we need you to keep your mask on. You don't value your life enough to know that.
And it was like that at church too.
You don't value your life enough to know that this could save someone or your own life.
Save yourself. Yeah.
So it's very something that I would like for, if you're watching or hearing, listening, just value yourself enough to obey those that give you rule, or have rule over you. The scripture says, obey them that have rule over you. We may not necessarily be your pastor, your parent, but if you come into someone else's house, you respect the rules of that house. Just value yourself enough to be willing to obey.
Absolutely. And so, before we end, I will say, I think what I got from this on the church side is, I think church itself has shifted in a way that will probably stay shifted. We will probably never have church as we knew it, where everyone is in the building. I think there's always going to be a number of people who are online. I think it behooves us to have good social media and video presence, good alternative ways of reaching people, and that's something that I've learned to kind of adjust to. It was a big adjustment. Even being young, it was a big adjustment for me. So I think that is just going to be the way, whether it be podcasts like this and it be Christian podcasts or informational podcasts, streaming, what have you. I think it's always going to be now very much technical and technology driven. Before we end on that note, I do want to let you know that you can sponsor our podcast by reaching out to us at funerals614@gmail.com. If you would like to be a sponsor, if you'd like for us to talk about your upcoming event, program, or anything like that, please certainly make sure you reach out to us, and we will be glad to get you into contact with the correct person to do so. It's been great speaking with you today. Again, I'm Pastor Art, and
I'm Pastor Baker.
Well, that's our time, and we look forward to our next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate our audience. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play Store, or wherever you consume podcasts. If you feel so inclined, leave us a comment, but please be sure to share this episode in your circle of influence. Until the next episode, I'm Lori Diaz, the Funeral Chic. Remember to serve well and have fun. Make it a great day.